Scroll disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction inspired by supernatural folklore and creative imagination. Any similarities to real events, people, or places are purely coincidental. The rituals, symbols, and themes described in this narrative are entirely fictional and should not be interpreted or attempted in real life. Reader discretion is advised, especially for those sensitive to horror, occult themes, or paranormal experiences. The air was still when I stepped out of the car. The kind of stillness that made every sound. My footsteps, the creak of the gate, even the wind brushing past the trees, feel amplified. My grandmother's house stood just beyond the overgrown hedge, its dark wooden frame silhouetted against the late afternoon sky. The paint was peeling, the windows fogged from the inside, and ivy had begun to reclaim the porch. It looked like time had stopped the day she passed away. I hadn't visited in years. We were close when I was younger. She used to read me strange stories, ones she swore were real. But after high school, I moved to the city, and our visits became rare phone calls. Now, after her death, it was my responsibility to sort through her things, sell the house, and move on. The inside smelled of old paper and dried herbs. Her furniture sat just as she left it. A rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves filled with jars labeled in her delicate script, and a faded portrait of my grandfather who had died decades earlier. The kitchen still had her favorite mug in the sink, stained with the last cup of herbal tea she'd ever make. There was something sad and eerie about how untouched everything felt, as if she might walk back in at any moment and ask why I didn't call more often. I started the cleaning process room by room. Most of the main floor was cluttered with books, candles, and small wooden carvings of animals and symbols I didn't recognize. I left the attic for last. I hated attics, too many shadows, too many secrets, but I knew that's where she kept the family heirlooms. Climbing the narrow wooden stairs to the attic, I had to push hard to get the trapdoor open. Dust rained down as the wooden panel groaned, revealing a cramped space filled with boxes, furniture draped in white sheets, and an overwhelming musty smell. I spent nearly an hour up there, opening trunks and sifting through photos, old clothes, and letters. Then I noticed something odd, a section of the wall where the wood didn't match the rest. I tapped it. Hollow. Carefully, I pried away a loose board. Behind it was a small hidden compartment, and inside lay a single item, a leather-bound book wrapped in a faded green ribbon. The leather was cracked, soft, and smelled faintly of lavender and something older, something like earth after rain. The ribbon slipped off easily, and I opened the cover. My grandmother's handwriting, flourished and neat. It began with simple entries, notes about garden planting, complaints about her arthritis, her thoughts on neighbors. But as I flipped deeper into the diary, the tone shifted. Words like binding, presence, and warding appeared. There were sketches of strange symbols, references to dates and times of the moon, and finally, on a page near the end, a title written in red ink, The Veil Ritual, for one final conversation with the departed. I stared at it for a long time. A part of me laughed, thinking it was one of her stories again, like the ones she used to tell me when I was a kid. But another part, one that remembered the way her eyes used to darken when she spoke about things not meant for children, couldn't look away. The instructions were handwritten and precise. It wasn't just a story. It was a ritual. And for some reason, I couldn't stop myself from reading more. The diary sat in my lap like it had a pulse. The air in the attic felt heavier now, the dim light from the small circular window casting strange shadows across the room. I turned back to the page titled The Veil Ritual and began to read, my fingers tracing the familiar shape of my grandmother's script. The first line was chilling. To speak with the dead, the living must part the veil, but the veil does not like to be moved. The ritual was laid out in detail, step by step. First, a circle must be drawn with ashes from a loved one's letter, something once touched and emotionally significant. Then, a silver mirror had to be placed at the center, surrounded by 4 black candles, each facing a direction: north, east, south, west. The ritual had to be performed on a night of waning moonlight, exactly 30 minutes after midnight, when the veil between worlds is thinnest. There were strange incantations written phonetically, most likely in Latin or some older tongue. I couldn't help but feel uneasy reading them, like my mouth didn't want to shape the words. My grandmother had also written warnings, some scratched out, others hastily added in the margins. Do not break the circle. Only call if your heart is true. Do not offer more than you can give. The ritual promised a brief conversation with the spirit of a deceased loved one, but only if done correctly. There were mentions of consequences if the ritual was rushed or if the person calling was not pure of intent. That last part stayed with me. What did it mean to be pure of intent? Was grief enough? Was curiosity a sin? I flipped back through the previous entries, trying to understand why my grandmother had recorded such a ritual. To my surprise, her diary didn't start as a spellbook or a cult journal. It was deeply personal, filled with her inner thoughts, worries, and grief, especially after my grandfather died. One entry caught my eye: "He still visits me in my dreams. The ritual let me see him once. I swore never to do it again. But now the veil is thinner, and I feel watched." Another entry, weeks later, said, "The thing that answered the second time was not him." Chills ran down my spine. Whatever she had done, it hadn't gone as planned. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just a diary. It was a record of regret. A journal of her attempts to undo something terrible, something she had let in. She didn't leave the ritual behind to be performed. She left it as a warning. Still, a part of me was fascinated. I had lost people too. My grandmother recently, my mother when I was 13. There were questions I had never asked, things I'd always wished I could say. Could this ritual actually work? Could I speak to them? Or would I just be following in my grandmother's footsteps, opening a door better left shut? I decided to take the diary downstairs, settling into her old armchair by the fireplace. I read late into the night, rereading the ritual, the ingredients, the preparation process. Her warnings became more urgent near the end, more frantic, as if she knew she was running out of time. If anyone finds this, do not be deceived by love. The ritual lies. It offers warmth but brings ice. That should have been enough to scare me off. But it wasn't. I began to think about the ingredients she listed. Some were specific: crushed lavender, ash from handwritten letters, a silver mirror. But others, like a drop of untainted blood or a memory offered freely, felt abstract, symbolic. I had no idea if I could find or create everything required. Then again, my grandmother had lived alone for decades. Everything she used in the ritual might still be here, hidden somewhere in this house. The seed had been planted. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I believed in it completely, but because I wanted to. Grief makes people do strange things. And curiosity? Even stranger. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and the old house creaked with age. I held the diary close, its fragile leather warm in my hands, like it remembered being used. And for the first time since I arrived, I wasn't sure I was alone. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm. Cleaning by day, reading the diary by night. Every room in the house now felt like it had something to hide. I began to see the home not as the place I once visited during holidays, but as a container, holding memories, secrets, and maybe something more. The ritual wouldn't leave my mind. I told myself I wasn't going to do it, that I was only curious. But I kept rereading the steps. I began collecting the items one by one, telling myself it was just to see if it was even possible. Most of the ingredients were easy to find. In her bedroom drawer, I found a small sachet of dried lavender sealed in wax paper. Old, but still fragrant. In the kitchen, a black candle sat at the back of the spice cupboard, and once I found one, I found 3 more, exactly 4, just like the ritual required. They were thick, handmade, with carved lines down the sides that looked suspiciously like the sigils drawn in the diary. I found a stack of old letters bound in twine inside a cedar box in the living room. Most were written by my mother to my grandmother when I was just a child. I ran my hand over the paper. The smell of age and ink brought tears to my eyes. I didn't want to burn them, but I picked one. Just one. A birthday letter with a pressed flower folded inside. It felt personal enough to carry emotional weight. The silver mirror was trickier. I had just about given up when I found it in the upstairs hallway closet, wrapped in velvet and tucked behind an old quilt. It was ornate and antique, with a carved frame that resembled vines twisting around thorns. The surface was surprisingly clean, almost unnaturally so, as if it didn't age with the rest of the house. The last item was the hardest. A drop of untainted blood. I wasn't sure what untainted meant. I assumed it had to be mine, willingly given. The diary mentioned offering it at the start of the ritual. Just a drop, to awaken the veil. It sounded dramatic, but by now, I had stopped dismissing things so easily. The more I gathered, the more I felt things shift around me. The house began to change. Not visually, but energetically. Lights flickered more often. At night, I heard whispers, faint and indecipherable, coming from behind closed doors. Shadows stretched in the corners longer than they should have. I'd walk into a room and feel the air grow cold, then warm again. Sometimes it felt like someone was just behind me. I told myself it was stress, that I hadn't processed my grandmother's death, that the isolation and the silence were playing tricks on me. But I knew better. One evening, as I sat in front of the fireplace with the diary open, I found a folded piece of paper tucked between 2 pages I'd already read. It wasn't written like the rest of the entries. It looked rushed. Ink was smeared and the words bled into the parchment. If you must do it, be sure it's for the right reasons. Curiosity feeds the wrong kind. The veil listens. I froze. Had I been feeding something already? Was I calling it without realizing? That night, I had a dream, or maybe it was something else. I stood in the attic, alone, holding the mirror. A voice called out. Not one I recognized, but soft, female, like a whisper in my ear. You found it. You opened it. Now follow through. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the diary lying open on my chest. The same warning was underlined in red. Do not offer more than you can give. Still, I didn't stop. The temptation had grown too strong. My grief had shifted into obsession. I needed to know if it worked. To see my grandmother again. Or my mother. Even if just for a moment. Even if only to say goodbye. That night, I made a final list. Tomorrow, I would perform the ritual. The night arrived without ceremony, clouds choking the moonlight, wind rattling the windows like impatient fingers. I waited until the house was completely silent. No creaks. No whispers. Just stillness. It was exactly 30 minutes after midnight when I descended into the basement, the diary clutched tightly in one hand and a metal tin of prepared items in the other. The basement had always been unsettling, even when I was a child. The stone walls were damp and the ceiling hung low with wooden beams that groaned with age. But tonight it felt worse, like the air had thickened, like the space itself was holding its breath. The single light bulb overhead flickered once and died, leaving me to light the way with a lantern. I cleared a space on the cold concrete floor and laid out the components. The black candles went first, north, east, south, west, each one placed with care at the corners of a large ash-drawn circle. I had crushed and burned the letter earlier that day, and now its powdered remains formed a rough but unbroken ring, just as the diary instructed. In the center, I laid the silver mirror, its frame gleaming even in the dim light. I couldn't see my reflection in it clearly. My face looked distant, warped slightly, like it belonged to someone else. I tried not to stare too long. Then came the lavender, scattered clockwise along the circle. Its scent was calming, masking the damp smell of mildew and earth. The last step was the blood. I took a small sewing needle from my pocket, sterilized it with the lantern's flame, and pricked the tip of my finger. A bead of crimson welled up. I hesitated. One drop. I let it fall onto the mirror. First, nothing happened. The drop sat there, dark and still. I waited, holding my breath. Then the air shifted. The flame of each candle rose high, flickering unnaturally. A soft hum began, so low it was almost inaudible, more felt in my bones than heard. The ash around the circle began to tremble. I felt a tug in the center of my chest, like something was reaching out from the mirror, brushing against the edges of my soul. I opened the diary to the incantation and began to read aloud. The words rolled from my tongue, foreign and heavy. The moment the final syllable left my lips, the room dropped several degrees. My breath came out in white plumes and the mirror's surface rippled like water stirred by an invisible hand. And then she appeared. Not in the mirror, but across from me inside the circle. My grandmother. She looked almost right. Her clothes were the same ones we buried her in. Her eyes were deep and kind, but glassy like marbles beneath the surface. She smiled, but it was strained, as though holding back pain or fear. "Why did you call me, child?" Her voice echoed softly, layered, as if others were speaking with her. "I wanted to see you. To talk. To say goodbye," I whispered, my voice shaking. Her expression twisted, not with anger, but with urgency. She knelt down slowly, eyes scanning the circle. "You shouldn't have done this," she said. The veil is not a door. It's a lock. What do you mean? I asked. Before she could answer, the candles flickered violently. The circle of ash shuddered again, this time breaking slightly near the east candle as if an unseen hand had smeared it. My grandmother's eyes widened. No. You broke her voice distorted suddenly, deepening. She flickered like an old VHS tape. And then, something else stepped into her place. It looked like her, but taller. Leaner. Its eyes were solid black, no whites at all. Its smile stretched far too wide. It stepped forward, testing the broken circle with one long-fingered foot. The veil had been pierced. I scrambled backward, trying to recite the incantation in reverse. The words wouldn't form. The entity watched me with a tilted head, amused as if it had seen this mistake before many times. It whispered, "She warned you. But you were curious. Curiosity is always the key." The mirror shattered without being touched, shards flying outward. A scream, my own or someone else's, rattled through the walls. Then darkness. Everything went still. And I was alone again. But something had changed. When I woke up, I was lying on the basement floor. The lantern was out. The candles had melted into thick black puddles. Shards of the silver mirror glittered around me like ice, and the ash circle had been completely blown apart as if something had stepped out of it with force. My body ached. My limbs were stiff and my fingertips tingled with pins and needles. My head pounded with the weight of whatever I had done. I tried to convince myself it had all been a hallucination. A stress-induced breakdown. Maybe I'd passed out mid-ritual. Maybe it never really worked. But then I heard it. A voice, soft and familiar, calling my name from upstairs. Lena, my heart stopped. It was my mother's voice. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the sting of small cuts on my hands and knees. I grabbed the diary and hurried up the basement stairs, each step echoing like thunder. The voice called again, gentle, longing. Lena, come here, sweet girl. It was her voice exactly. The cadence, the warmth. A sound I hadn't heard since I was 13. Tears welled in my eyes as I reached the living room. It was empty. Quiet. But I could feel her presence, like static in the air. Mom? I whispered. Where are you? In here. The voice now came from the old mirror above the fireplace, the one that had always hung there, untouched, as long as I could remember. It shimmered faintly even though the house was dark. The reflection inside was wrong. The room shown in the mirror was brighter, and standing in the middle of it was her. My mother. Looking just as she did in the last photo we ever took together. I took a step closer, heart racing. Mom, is it really you? She smiled. Yes, baby. You found me. Just like she did. She? You mean Grandma? Her smile faltered. Just for a second. A flicker. Then back again. She brought me close, but couldn't finish. But you're strong. You opened it wider. Something about her tone made me hesitate. I looked down at the diary, flipping to the page where my grandmother had scrawled, "The veil lies. It wears the faces of the lost." I backed away slightly. What's the last thing you said to me before you died? I asked cautiously. The figure in the mirror blinked. Then smiled again, a little too wide. I told you I'd always be with you. My stomach turned. That wasn't right? She died suddenly in the hospital. I never got to say goodbye. There were no last words. The thing in the mirror seemed to realize its mistake. Its smile didn't fade, it grew. Its face twitched, then shifted. The eyes darkened. The skin began to crack like porcelain, revealing something writhing underneath. Come now, it hissed. You called to us. You opened the door. You don't get to shut it again. I slammed the mirror with the diary. The glass cracked, but didn't break. The voice screamed, but not in pain. In laughter. That's when the lights in the house began to flicker violently. The walls groaned. Shadows crawled out from corners, stretching across the floor like black water. Something had come through. Maybe not completely, but enough. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. The scent of lavender would fill rooms I hadn't entered. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of breathing, not mine, and find footprints in the ash I thought I'd cleaned away. I tried to burn the diary. It wouldn't catch. I tried to leave the house, but the moment I stepped outside, I'd black out and wake up on the floor just past the threshold. Trapped. The worst part? The voices changed. Sometimes it was Grandma. Sometimes Mom. Sometimes others. People I didn't know. Children. Men. All calling to me from the shadows. All asking me to listen. All knowing my name. I was no longer just a visitor in this house. I had become a beacon, something on this side of the veil that they could see. That they could use. And something was waiting for me to listen again. Days became difficult to track. Whether it was the endless gray sky or the creeping dread inside the house, time itself began to feel warped. The clocks no longer ticked. My phone's battery remained frozen at 66% no matter how long I charged it. Food spoiled faster, and I hadn't seen my own reflection in any mirror since the night of the ritual. Instead, I saw her. The entity. It didn't always look the same. Sometimes it wore my grandmother's face. Sometimes my mother's. Once it even appeared as me, but smiling like it knew something I didn't. No matter the form, the eyes were always wrong, voids that swallowed light, emotionless and infinite. It didn't speak aloud anymore. It didn't need to. It whispered through the walls, hummed through the pipes, and stared through the mirrors. Its presence grew stronger each day. The boundaries that had once held it at bay were eroding like wood rotting beneath rain. One morning, I awoke with symbols scratched onto the skin of my forearm, sigils from the diary. I hadn't drawn them. They were too precise. They burned, then faded. But the sensation remained. I covered them with sleeves, but the feeling of being marked, claimed, didn't go away. I tried everything to reverse the ritual. The diary had only one page that mentioned closure. My grandmother wrote, "The window cannot be closed the way it was opened. To send it back, you must offer something greater than curiosity. A sacrifice of understanding. Of grief. Cryptic. Frustrating. What did that even mean? I flipped through the rest of the diary, hunting for answers. One page stood out. It was blank, but warm to the touch. I held it over the candlelight. Slowly, words began to appear in red, curling script. It is awake. It knows you now. It has worn your name and tasted your pain. You are not the first. You will not be the last. Suddenly, every unexplained death in my family made sense. My mother's sudden illness. My aunt's suicide. The fact that none of my grandmother's siblings lived past 40. We were all tied to this house, this thing. And now it had me. That night, the entity finally manifested fully. I had been avoiding the attic even though something deep inside told me that's where it lived now. But the whispers led me there, one slow step at a time. I carried a lantern and the diary, praying they'd protect me. I don't know what I hoped to find: an answer, a door, even a trap to spring. What I found was a mirror that hadn't been there before, massive, full-length, framed in bone-like wood. It stood at the far end of the attic, and it didn't reflect the room I was in. It reflected another place entirely, dark woods under a red sky. And standing there was the entity. It stepped forward, closer to the glass, until its face nearly pressed against it. "You brought me through," it said, in a chorus of voices, my grandmother, my mother, and mine, all braided together. "Now let me finish." I asked, "What do you want?" It tilted its head. "To remember what I was. You helped. But not enough." The mirror rippled, and I felt it reach through. Not with hands, but with presence. My body froze. My memories flashed before my eyes, not just my own, but those of my mother, her mother, and those before them. I saw rituals in the woods, offerings made in blood, candles lit in grief. I saw generations of women feeding this thing unknowingly. I fell to my knees, breathless. My head felt like it was splitting open. Then came the choice. In my grandmother's voice, it said, "Give me the rest. Let go of what binds you. The pain. The sorrow. Your name. And I will leave." That was the sacrifice she had written about. Not death. Not a person. It wanted me to surrender my grief. To stop remembering. To let go of everyone I had lost. But what would that make me? I backed away. "No," I said. "I won't forget them. I won't forget me." The entity screamed, not in anger, but disappointment. The mirror cracked slightly. The attic shook. Dust fell from the rafters. "You could have been free," it whispered. And then, silence. The mirror was still. The reflection was gone. But deep down, I knew it hadn't left. It was still here, waiting. Because now that it knew my name, it would never truly leave, not unless I found a way to seal the veil. Or someone else came along and opened it wider. I no longer trusted the house, not a single room. The mirrors were covered now, every last one draped in black cloth or turned to face the wall. Yet, even then, I could still feel it watching me. Through reflections I couldn't see. Through cracks between thoughts. The entity had slipped in deeper than I thought possible. And still, the diary whispered. The pages turned on their own sometimes, revealing new entries I had never read before. Writings in my grandmother's hand appeared overnight, dated years after her death. She spoke directly to me now. "You saw it. You resisted. That is rare. But it is not over. There is more to remember. There is more to reveal." In one such entry, she wrote of a hidden compartment beneath the house, far below the basement. A chamber used only once before, meant to contain, not summon. A place built by the first woman in our family line who had encountered the entity and survived. My grandmother had never dared enter it, fearing what might still linger inside. But I knew I had to. With a flashlight, a crowbar, and the diary, I pried up the floorboards in the deepest corner of the basement. Beneath was a trapdoor sealed with rusted latches and old chains. It took me nearly an hour to break through them. The air that hissed out smelled of iron and old rot. The chamber below was tight, carved into stone. Its walls were etched with symbols, hundreds of them glowing faintly in red when my flashlight passed over them. In the center of the room lay a stone table, and on it a box made of the same silver as the original mirror. The lock on it was familiar. It was the symbol burned onto my arm days ago. I placed my hand on the lock. It clicked. Inside the box was a letter. Not from my grandmother. From someone named Elena, dated 1893. She wrote, "To the one who finds this, you are like me. You've seen it, heard it, felt its hunger. It is not a spirit. It is not a demon. It is memory twisted into hunger. It feeds on what we refuse to let go of. Our grief is its gate. Our pain is its anchor." She continued, "Each generation, it finds a way back through a different grief. A daughter who dies too young. A son who never returns from war. A child lost to fever. It speaks through loss because loss weakens the veil. That is why it always finds women in our line, because we carry grief like it's sewn into our skin." I trembled as I read those words. But you can trap it again. Not banish. Not kill. It is a wound, not a creature. And like any wound, it must be closed. Then she described the process, a circle of memory, not ash. Personal items from those I had lost. A mirror, but not to see, it must be faced inward, reflecting nothing. A name, not spoken, but written in blood, my own. The idea made my skin crawl. Not because it was dark, but because it made sense. The entity wasn't just some ghost or demon. It was an ancient echo that became stronger the more people believed they were broken by grief. The more they clung to sorrow, the more it had power. The more they performed these rituals to connect with the dead, the more they fed it. And I had fed it plenty. I returned to the house and gathered the items, a broken locket from my mother's drawer, a button from my grandmother's coat, the photograph of US-3 taken years ago. I placed them in a circle atop the attic floor. Then I took a blank mirror, turned it around, and laid it at the center so that its reflective surface faced the floor, unseen. With trembling fingers, I pricked my palm and wrote my name in blood on the wood beneath the mirror. The house immediately responded. Wind rushed through closed windows. The air crackled. The entity screamed, not from within the mirror, but from all around me. It knew what I was doing. It tried to stop me, but it was bound now to the ritual. It couldn't break through, not yet. I spoke aloud, "You are not welcome. You are not real. You are grief in a mask, and I refuse to wear it." The circle glowed faintly. The mirror trembled. Then silence. Not a fade. Not a slow dying out. An instant, deafening silence. The house calmed. The mirror cracked, but didn't shatter. The entity was sealed, not destroyed, but trapped again. For now. And I understood what Elena meant. This wasn't a victory. It was a pause. The wound had closed, but only because I'd finally accepted it was a wound, not a doorway, not a mystery. Just pain. And pain, when faced, can be endured. The house feels different now. Lighter, almost. The floorboards don't creak as often. The shadows don't linger like they used to. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without waking up to whispers or the cold presence of something watching me from the corner. But peace doesn't come easily. There's a strange kind of silence that follows survival. A stillness that isn't comforting, but hollow. It feels like standing in the eye of a storm, knowing the winds may come back someday. I've kept the attic sealed. The cracked mirror is now locked inside a chest, buried beneath salt and brick in the basement. The diary is hidden too, inside a safe I bought specifically to store it, along with Elena's letter and every other scrap of that cursed knowledge. I thought about burning it all, but I didn't, because part of me knows this wasn't the end. I've started tracing my family history, names and birth records, letters, death certificates. And what I found unsettled me even more. Every woman in our bloodline, dating back at least 7 generations, had experienced some version of what I just lived through. Disappearances, sudden deaths, strange symbols in old journals. A few even changed their names and moved far away, trying to escape it. None ever could. It's not just about the ritual. It's about the legacy of pain we carry, the grief passed down like a cursed heirloom. The entity isn't a monster in the traditional sense. It's not a creature hiding under the bed or a shadow with claws. It's what we become when we bury sorrow instead of healing from it. And that's what makes it dangerous. I've been writing everything down. Not just the story, but everything I remember, how it began, what it felt like, what it whispered. I've written it in my own words because I don't want this to become another mysterious diary passed through generations. I want to leave a warning, not a temptation. If someone finds this decades from now, I want them to understand what they're up against. Not magic, not the occult, but grief weaponized. Some nights, I still hear faint echoes, especially if I let my mind wander too far into memory. The entity isn't here anymore, but it's not gone either. It's waiting, watching from that thin line between our world and the next, feeding on those desperate enough to call out across the veil. And there will always be someone who does. We all want to see them again, our lost loved ones. We all want to believe there's a way to reach them, to say the words we never got to say. That's the entity's trap. It gives just enough to make you believe, just enough to get inside. But once it's in, it never truly leaves. So I remind myself daily, grief isn't a hole to fall into. It's a wound to tend to. It aches, it scars, but it doesn't have to fester. And it doesn't need to be summoned. I still miss my mother. I still miss my grandmother. But I will never again try to bring them back. They are at peace. And now maybe I can be too. For the first time in a long while, I opened the front door and walked outside. The wind was soft. The sun was warm. No nosebleeds. No blackouts. No invisible tether yanking me back into the dark. Just fresh air. I took a deep breath, stepped off the porch, and whispered a promise into the breeze. It ends with me. But even as I said it, I couldn't help but wonder. What if someone else finds the diary? What if they don't resist? What if the entity doesn't need my bloodline anymore? Because evil, true evil, doesn't care about names. It doesn't care about tradition. It only cares that someone is hurting and willing to open the door. 34.